At 3:17 a.m., while the office slept under blue emergency lights and humming servers, one email slipped beyond the corporate firewall. By morning, it would be called personal. By next week, it would become evidence. The director didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The glass walls of the conference room carried silence better than any microphone. "This is personal. Stay out," he said, each word placed carefully on the table between us like a paperweight. Outside, Slack notifications blinked in soft green pulses across half the floor, a quiet constellation of corporate insomnia. I nodded, because nodding costs nothing. But inside, something tightened. Not anger yet, just a thin wire of attention pulled taut. Our retention policy was clear. Any outbound communication touching financial projections required archiving. The rule wasn't dramatic. It lived in a PDF nobody read and in a footer nobody noticed. Yet policies are like smoke detectors. You ignore them until the air changes. And at 3:17 a.m., the air had changed. I had seen the log entry before my first coffee, an email leaving the corporate server at an hour when even ambition sleeps. The subject line was bland. The attachment wasn't. He called it personal. The system called it external transfer. I walked back to my desk through the low hum of the open space. The office smelled faintly of overwatered plants and burnt espresso. Two analysts were whispering about an investor call scheduled for Friday. The word valuation drifted like perfume, expensive and volatile. On Slack, someone had posted a celebratory emoji for a new partnership. Celebration always comes first. Questions follow later. I opened the log again. Timestamp, IP file size, nothing illegal in isolation. That was the elegance of it. If you glanced quickly, thinking fast and slow, you'd see a harmless send. System 1 would shrug and move on, but System 2, the slower, stubborn part, leaned closer. Why forward a draft forecast before the board had seen it? Why at 3:17? And why from a device that had been updated the night before? Curiosity is dangerous in offices. It is mistaken for disloyalty. Yet negligence wears the same shoes. I didn't confront him. Confrontation is theater, and theaters have audiences. Instead, I opened the archive tool and quietly initiated a preservation protocol. The phrase appeared in the system banner in calm blue letters, preserving the data. Words that work, I once read, aren't loud, they're precise. Preserve, not accuse, not expose, preserve. A backup copy settled into secure storage with a progress bar that moved slower than my pulse. 90%, 95. Done. The fluorescent lights flickered once, as if the building itself had inhaled. By noon, the director was laughing near the elevators, one hand on an investor's shoulder, promising transparency with the ease of someone who had never had to define it. Transparency is such a beautiful word. It suggests glass, it forgets fingerprints. In the afternoon, a junior manager stopped by my desk. "He seemed tense this morning," she said, lowering her voice. "Do you think something's wrong?" I smiled the professional smile that reveals nothing and everything. "Internal controls are there for a reason," I answered. She blinked, unsure whether that was reassurance or warning. Because here is the quiet truth about offices. Commands feel like laws when delivered from above, but policies are the Constitution. One is immediate, the other is enduring. And when the two collide, the collision is rarely loud at first. By evening, Slack had moved on to weekend plans and gifts. The server room, however, kept its steady hum, impartial and tireless. Data does not take sides. It waits. Before shutting down my screen, I reviewed the log one more time. 3:17, external recipient. Attachment intact. Backup secured. I felt neither triumph nor fear, just a calm, deliberate steadiness. Risk creates tension, and tension sharpens focus. The boron letters once described it as stretching a rubber band until it almost snaps. You don't release it. You hold it. Let others feel the strain. The director passed behind me on his way out. "I trust you understand boundaries," he said lightly, almost kindly. I met his gaze. "I understand procedures." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his expression. Not anger. Calculation. And that was when I knew this wasn't about a single email. It was about who believed the rules were suggestions and who knew they were safeguards. If I was wrong, nothing would happen. The week would pass in ordinary meetings and polite applause. But if I was right, the clock had already started ticking, quietly and without permission. Some timestamps don't fade, and some nights, 317 refuses to stay in the dark. The week did not explode. It tightened. Monday arrived wrapped in routine. Calendar invites, a rescheduled investor briefing, someone's birthday cake melting under fluorescent lights. Normalcy is the most convincing disguise. On Slack, the director posted a confident message about alignment and shared vision. Emojis followed like obedient applause. Yet beneath the surface, something small and metallic scraped against the rhythm of the office. On Tuesday morning, an email from our insurer landed in the compliance inbox. Subject line: Cyber Risk Review, Clarification Request. Polite, neutral, the kind of message that sounds like a knock instead of a warning. I read it twice before forwarding it to legal. My pulse did not change. My breathing did not shift. But the rubber band stretched another millimeter. The insurer had detected an anomaly in outbound traffic metadata. They wanted confirmation that internal controls were functioning as designed. Such elegant phrasing, not breach, not leak, just confirmation. The director called an unscheduled meeting within the hour. Glass walls again. Reflections layered over reflections. He stood at the head of the table, jacket still on, as if ready to leave at any moment. "This is routine," he said smoothly. "We'll respond and move on." His gaze brushed past me, paused, then continued. "A fraction too long." Routine is a word managers use when they hope repetition will make it true. Legal outlined the response process: collect logs, verify retention policy adherence, confirm that no sensitive data left without authorization. The phrases sounded clinical, almost sterile. Forensic review was mentioned. Softly, like a distant thundercloud no one wanted to name too clearly. Someone coughed. Someone else tapped a pen. I opened my laptop and projected the archive record. Timestamp 317. External domain. File hash. Backup confirmation. Preserving the data. Silence rearranged itself around the table. "We already secured the record," I said evenly. "Internal controls triggered archival in accordance with retention policy." The room inhaled. The director leaned back, fingers steepled. "And why was that necessary?" he asked, voice cool enough to frost glass. "Because the system flagged outbound financial documentation outside standard hours," I replied. "No accusation, no drama, just procedure." Thinking fast and slow, when presented calmly, a rule becomes harder to argue against than a person. For a second, irritation flickered in his eyes. Then calculation returned. "Good," he said finally. "That's what controls are for." Agreement can be more revealing than resistance. By Wednesday, the forensic team requested device logs. IT moved quietly, almost respectfully. Machines were imaged. Access histories compiled. The server room hummed with the indifferent patience of steel and code. Conversations on Slack grew shorter. Even the emojis seemed cautious. An investor called that afternoon asking whether the review would affect the upcoming funding round. The director assured him everything was fully contained. The phrase echoed in my mind. Containment implies risk. Risk implies consequence. On Thursday evening, as rain streaked down the office windows in silver threads, I stayed late to finalize documentation. Outside, the city lights blurred into watercolor smudges. Inside, the numbers remained sharp. File integrity confirmed. Chain of custody intact. No data alteration. The preservation had worked exactly as designed. I felt something unexpected then. Not triumph, not relief. Clarity. He stopped by my desk again, quieter this time. "You escalated quickly," he said. "I followed policy," I answered. A pause. The faint smell of his cologne mixed with ozone from overheated circuits. "You could have come to me first." "And bypassed the system?" I met his gaze. That would have been personal. The word lingered between us, changed now. He gave a tight nod and walked away. Friday morning arrived with a formal notification. The insurer would conduct a brief external validation. Not a crisis, a review. The difference matters in headlines. It matters even more in reputations. At noon, the auditor dialed in. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. He reviewed the documentation, confirmed timestamps, verified that the retention policy had triggered archival before any deletion could occur. Questions precise, answers measured. The rubber band stretched to its limit. Then he cleared his throat. Based on the materials provided, internal control worked as intended. 4 words: clean, definitive. Across the table, shoulders lowered by invisible degrees. Legal exhaled. IT relaxed. Even Slack seemed to breathe again as green dots reappeared. The director nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. Excellent, he said. That's reassuring. But reassurance has layers. Some feel it, others calculate its cost. When the meeting ended, colleagues offered small smiles in my direction. Quick, discreet acknowledgments. No applause. Offices rarely clap for prevention. They reward outcomes. An hour later, HR sent a calendar invite titled Role Alignment Discussion. Neutral words. Strategic timing. I closed my screen and looked once more at the archived record. 317. Preserved. Verified. Neutralized. What unsettled me wasn't the review itself. It was how close silence had come to winning. Because if the system hadn't worked, if preservation had waited, if procedure had bowed to personality, Friday would have told a different story. And some stories once told cannot be archived. Follow for more stories where procedure speaks louder than authority, and where quiet decisions change everything. The calendar invite from HR sat in my inbox like a sealed envelope no one wanted to open first. Role alignment discussion. Friday, 4:30 p.m. Timing in corporate life is rarely accidental. Late enough to avoid morning gossip. Early enough to prevent weekend speculation from spiraling. I accepted without comment. By then, the office had regained its usual tempo. Laughter drifted from the break area. Someone argued gently about fonts in a presentation deck. Slack pulsed again with celebratory gifs. The crisis that wasn't had already begun dissolving into narrative. Routine review. Strong controls. Nothing to see. But reputations don't dissolve that quickly. They recalibrate. Around noon, the director sent a company-wide message thanking the teams involved in swift compliance coordination. My name wasn't mentioned, neither was his. It was written in that smooth corporate dialect where responsibility floats comfortably above specifics. Transparency, again, without fingerprints. I spent the afternoon reviewing quarterly documentation, answering routine queries, behaving as if nothing had shifted. Yet, something had. Conversations paused half a second longer when I approached. IT nodded at me with a new warmth. Legal responded faster than usual. Respect in offices doesn't arrive loudly. It adjusts the air pressure. At 4:28 p.m., I walked to HR. The room was smaller than the conference space, warmer, less theatrical. The blinds were partially drawn, casting horizontal shadows across the table like careful lines on a ledger. The HR manager smiled. Professional, measured. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We wanted to discuss your scope." Scope is another elegant word. It suggests expansion without promising it. She referenced the insurer's feedback, the auditor's confirmation, the efficiency of the preservation process. Internal control worked, she repeated, almost verbatim. Words echoed differently in smaller rooms. Then she leaned forward slightly. "We believe your responsibilities should reflect the value you demonstrated." The sentence hung there, bright and understated. Outside the door, footsteps passed. A phone rang somewhere in the corridor. The office continued its ordinary choreography. Inside, the rubber band finally released, not with a snap, but with a controlled exhale. "This isn't about one incident," she continued. "It's about risk culture." Risk culture. 2 words that decide whether companies survive storms or become cautionary tales. The offer wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no applause. A title adjustment. Expanded oversight of compliance and data governance. A salary revision aligned with strategic impact. Corporate language again, measured, deliberate, yet beneath it, unmistakable recognition. I thanked her calmly, asked practical questions, clarified reporting lines. Emotion, like data, is best archived until after the meeting. When I stepped back into the hallway, the director was speaking near the elevators. He glanced at me, briefly, assessing. In his expression, there was no apology. There was something more complex. Acceptance, perhaps? Or understanding that systems, when respected, outlast personalities. He approached. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said, tone neutral. "It's a role alignment," I replied lightly. A pause. "You handled the review well. I handled the policy." For a moment, we stood in that narrow corridor where power and procedure intersect. Offices are full of such invisible crossroads. Most people rush through them, some notice. He gave a short nod. "Good work." Simple words, no warmth, no edge, just acknowledgement. As he walked away, I felt neither victory nor vindication, only steadiness. Because this was never about proving someone wrong. It was about proving the system right. Back at my desk, Slack pinged again, this time from IT. "Congrats! Drink soon?" I smiled, typed back a restrained emoji. Celebration, like transparency, benefits from moderation. Through the window, the city was beginning to glow in early evening light. Glass towers reflected one another, endless layers of mirrored ambition. Somewhere inside them, other emails were leaving other servers. Other decisions were being framed as personal. The difference between personal and procedural is often just one quiet choice made at 3:17. And tonight, as I shut down my screen, the building hummed not with tension, but with equilibrium. For now. Monday felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just calibrated. The new title appeared beneath my name in the internal directory at 8:42 a.m. It was a small change in typography, yet Slack reacted faster than markets do to rumors. Notifications stacked neatly on the side of my screen. Well deserved. Strong move. About time. Offices rarely agree on anything, but they respect momentum. I adjusted nothing about my routine. Coffee, log review, compliance dashboard. The hum of the server room remained steady, impartial as ever. Power in corporations doesn't live in volume, it lives in access. And now, my access had widened. The first meeting under my expanded scope was with IT and legal. Joint session, glass walls, controlled air. The agenda read, Retention Policy Optimization. Harmless on paper. Structural in practice. Given last week's validation, I began, projecting a summary slide. We should strengthen automated alerts for off-hours outbound transfers involving financial documentation. No accusations, no references, just refinement. The IT lead nodded immediately. We can configure layered thresholds, fewer gray areas. Legal added, clearer escalation paths reduce ambiguity. Ambiguity. That fragile space where intention hides? I noticed something subtle then. The director was not in the room. Attendance had shifted. Decision-making had widened. Systems were being discussed as frameworks, not as obstacles. Two analysts proposed adding mandatory encryption flags for specific attachment categories. Another suggested quarterly forensic simulations. Practice without panic. The conversation moved with constructive energy, not defensive tension. That's when I realized something important. Risk culture isn't built in crises. It's built in the quiet after. Later that afternoon, an investor requested a transparency report before finalizing a funding tranche. Previously, such a request would have triggered visible anxiety. This time, the response was immediate. Documentation compiled. Audit trail summarized. Controls highlighted. Strong governance, the investor replied in a follow-up email. 2 words, quiet leverage. In the hallway, conversations no longer paused when I approached. They adjusted, more precise, less speculative. Authority had shifted from personality to structure. It felt less dramatic, more durable. Around 6 p.m., as sunlight angled low and turned the office windows into sheets of amber glass, the director stepped into my doorway. I reviewed the proposed policy updates, he said. And? I asked evenly. They're solid. No resistance. No edge. He glanced toward the compliance dashboard glowing on my monitor. I underestimated the optics, he added, almost casually. Optics? Not guilt? Not error. Language matters. Optics are reflections, I said. Controls are foundations. A brief silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just honest. I suppose we both learned something, he said. Perhaps. But lessons in offices are rarely symmetrical. After he left, I sat for a moment, watching the dashboard metrics refresh in real time. Outbound activity normal. Encryption compliance up. Alert thresholds recalibrated. The system had adapted. Outside, the city shifted into evening rhythm. Traffic lights blinked in ordered sequences. Elevators carried ambition upward and doubt downward. Somewhere, another executive was likely labeling something personal that policy would eventually redefine. What changed here wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no public scandal, no visible fallout. Just a recalibration of gravity. And gravity, once corrected, holds everything in place. As I packed my bag, Slack pinged again, this time from HR. Board review next month. They'd like a brief overview of compliance evolution. Evolution, not reaction. I closed my laptop slowly. Because when the board begins asking for your perspective, the story is no longer about one email at 3:17. It's about who the system trusts to guard the next one. The boardroom was quieter than any server room, but heavier. No glass walls this time. Solid wood, muted carpet, a long table polished to a reflection that softened every face into diplomacy. City skyline behind floor-to-ceiling windows, pale morning light dissolving the sharpness of the towers into something almost forgiving. I connected my laptop without ceremony. On the agenda, compliance evolution overview. Evolution is a careful word. It implies growth without admitting prior weakness. I appreciated the restraint. The chair of the board nodded for me to begin. I didn't start with the incident. I started with structure. Over the last quarter, I said evenly, we enhanced automated retention triggers, layered outbound alert thresholds, and clarified escalation paths for off-hours financial data transfers. Slide change. Metrics. Response times reduced. Encryption compliance increased. Forensic simulation readiness implemented. No drama, just design. Two directors leaned forward. One took notes. Preserving the data, I continued, letting the phrase sit clearly in the air, is not a reaction. It's a principle. Controls exist to protect value, financial and reputational. The word reputational carries weight in rooms like this. It is the silent shareholder. A board member asked about investor perception. I referenced the recent funding confirmation, strong governance feedback, independent validation, calm outcomes, no mention of 317. Because the point was never the hour. The CFO spoke next. Were there operational disruptions during the review? None, I answered. Internal control worked as designed. The phrase returned again, steady, almost architectural. Across the table, the director sat composed, hands folded. No interruption, no correction. When our eyes met briefly, there was no tension left. Only recognition that the narrative had shifted beyond either of us. Questions continued. Contingency modeling? Insurance premium impact? Long-term cyber risk posture? Each answer precise, unembellished. By the time the final slide faded, the room felt lighter. Not because risk had vanished, but because it had been named, measured, integrated. The board chair closed his notebook. This is the kind of infrastructure that prevents surprises, he said. Prevention rarely earns applause. It earns trust. After the meeting, as directors filtered out with quiet conversations about strategy and market timing, the chair paused beside me. Good work, she said simply. We'll be formalizing expanded oversight under your office next quarter. Not dramatic, not theatrical, structural. In the hallway outside, sunlight hit the marble floor in clean geometric lines. The building felt less like a maze and more like a system. Interconnected, deliberate. The director approached once more. You handled that well, he said. Procedure scales, I replied. A faint smile. So does reputation. He extended his hand. I shook it. No triumph, no rivalry, just equilibrium restored. Later, back at my desk, the compliance dashboard refreshed again. Normal outbound activity, alerts calibrated, policies active. The quiet hum of the server room below continued its tireless vigilance. I opened the archived log one final time. 317, external transfer, preserved, verified, closed. Not erased, not dramatized. Simply integrated into the system's memory, where lessons belong. Outside, the city shimmered in late afternoon light, every glass surface reflecting another endless layers of ambition, balanced by unseen frameworks. Somewhere, another executive might be calling something personal. Somewhere else, another analyst might hesitate. What changed here wasn't power, it was gravity. And gravity, once aligned with principle, does not need to raise its voice. I shut down my screen. The building hummed, steady, controlled, prepared. Internal control worked, and this time, everyone understood why.